Welcome back to the Team to Beat Miami Heat podcast, your one-stop shop for daily Miami Heat content. We're pushing to 2,000 subscribers. So if you guys do enjoy my content, it would mean a lot to me if you guys could subscribe to the channel. So thank you so much. So it's time to pod, y'all. For today's episode, I want to talk about the ESPN article that came out predicting the 2024-2025 NBA season win totals for each team. And so, of course, want to talk about their prediction for the Miami Heat. And so, if we take a look here, we can go through the individual teams later, but I want to talk specifically about the Miami Heat. So, the Miami Heat are projected to win 44.5 games next season. And so, this means the odds makers, Vegas, folks, the betting folks, gamblers are basically saying that the Miami Heat are going to have a worse record this season than they did last season, which is not encouraging if you're a Miami Heat fan. But again, this is just a prediction. These are never 100% accurate. So the Miami Heat were 46-36 last season, 10 games above 500, which got them to the 8th seed in the playoffs last year. And the Miami Heat were again a play-in team. And so I think based on the Miami Heat losing Caleb Martin, who is a important high-level role player on this team, and not adding any other stars, and probably based on their injury history, knowing that Jimmy Butler has played on average like 60 games per season for the Miami Heat, plus Tyler Hero's injury history where he's never played more than 67 games. So I'm assuming they're going to think, factor in injuries and also factor in the young players that are now going to be in this Miami Heat rotation, like Jaime Jaquez and Jovic, Kalel Ware, perhaps Kashad Johnson or Josh Christopher, and some of these undrafted guys. And that's a recipe for the Miami Heat potentially having a worse record. And so if we look at the other teams in the East right now, so Boston 58.5, Cleveland 47.5, the Pacers 46.5, that's 3 teams ahead of us. Bucks 50 wins, that's 4 teams. The Knicks 53, 5 teams. Orlando 47.5, 6. Philadelphia 52.5. That's 7 teams projected to finish ahead of the Miami Heat. So based on these projections, the Miami Heat would fall back into the 8th spot and back in the play-in race, which is a place they don't want to be because, as I've said, and I will keep saying, no 8th seed has ever won an NBA championship. It's very hard to win. It's very hard to even beat the 1 seed. The Miami Heat did it a couple seasons ago when they beat the Bucks in that first round as the 8th seed, and they went on to go to the NBA Finals. But they ultimately lost to the number 1 seed, which was the Denver Nuggets at that point. But anyway, not very promising. Again, the Miami Heat are projected to be 8th. We've had some roundtable episodes where we predicted Miami Heat would fall anywhere between 6 and 8. I think the best case scenario is probably the 5 seed for the Miami Heat, and that's if Jimmy Butler's healthy, Tyler Hero's healthy, Bam Adebayo plays better, Jovic and Jaquez play better. That's if Terry Rozier can stay healthy and contribute as one of our best offensive players, and then of course adding in the young players like Kalel, Ware, and a few others into the system, and hope that they can, come in and make an impact in their rookie year. So all of that has to go right, in my opinion, for the Miami Heat to just get the 5th seed. I mean, they could get the 4th seed, perhaps, who knows? But then other teams have to get injured and have to have bad seasons, essentially, for the Miami Heat to leapfrog 4 other teams or 5 other teams to get out of their projected 8th seed to get into that, 4 or even 5 seed. So, yeah, not the greatest, I guess, news. I don't know if I want to call this news, but I project the Miami Heat to get anywhere from, even worse, 43 wins maybe to 46 or 47. Like they, if you do plus or minus 3, I think in either direction is feasible for this, Miami Heat season upcoming. And I also wanted to talk too, though, about the Locked On NBA episode that I watched today with John Corrales and I forgot the guy who does Locked On Pelicans, but he was the co-host today, and they were talking about how they think that the Miami Heat should tank next season and how they could be a surprising tank candidate, because right now they went over the same season win total, win rate um, across the NBA, and talked about teams in the East and the West, and they talked about the Miami Heat being at a crossroads right now where we still have Jimmy Butler, we still have Bam Adebayo and Tyler and Terry, and we also have all these young players that I've mentioned earlier in this episode, and so we have this blended build. And we've said this before in past episodes, the Miami Heat are stuck in the middle, which is not like a good place to be right now. We're like a mediocre team, and I mean an eighth seed is considered a mediocre team, right? So it's a team that's barely making the playoffs, and they were saying that this Miami Heat team could be a candidate to tank because of the Cooper Flag sweepstakes. So Cooper Flag is going to be the consensus number one pick next season. And I don't watch college, so I don't really pay attention. But apparently, this next draft class is going to be just really good in general. So there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to be poor, as I showed the win rates there. Like the in the East specifically, the Hawks, the Nets are going to be projected to be bad. The Bulls, um, and the Wizards, of course, are going to be bad. Toronto Raptors, perhaps, and so the Miami Heat, who are projected to be eighth, they were mentioning that what's if they trade Jimmy Butler, mid-season to a team that is contending that needs one more star to go over the hump, which would be a win-win where Jimmy Butler would have an opportunity to win a championship with another team, and the Miami Heat would get, maybe draft capital or cap space for Jimmy Butler, and that way you put the team in Bam Adebayo's hands with Tyler Hero, with Terry Rozier, and by losing Jimmy Butler, they weren't sure how many losses that would equate to. Um, but it could, in theory, put the Miami Heat in a category where they don't make the playoffs. Of course, I don't think they make the playoffs if Jimmy Butler is not on this team next season, because we know how important Jimmy Butler is. I don't care what people say; he's still the best player on the Miami Heat. Bam Adebayo is the most important player, and he's going to be our franchise player and up and coming All Star. Um, but Jimmy Butler is still our best guy. Like we saw what happened in the playoffs without him. We also saw before that, which was frustrating, that in the play-in game against the Sixers, playoff Jimmy was activated. You saw how engaged he was. He had 13 or 14 points in that first half with like 3 or 4 steals and looked like playoff Jimmy. And of course, we knew what happened there. He, tore his MCL or sprained his MCL um, at the buzzer before the first half on a play where he got fouled by Kelly Oubre, and it was super unfortunate. But we see that Jimmy Butler is still our best player, and we go as far as Jimmy takes us. So if Jimmy's not on this team, we're not going to make the playoffs, and that could be an okay thing because next year we owe our draft pick to the OKC Thunder unless we're a lottery team. So if we get 1 through 14, then we get to keep our own pick. If it's 15 or above, we have to give that to the Thunder. So they were suggesting the Miami Heat they do a soft tank, a 1-year tank. And I know this is not part of Miami Heat culture. It's not part of our vocabulary. And Pat, Mickey, Spo, probably wouldn't be on board for this ever, especially Pat. But they were mentioning that, like, hey, what's if the Miami Heat team, trades Jimmy Butler and maybe sits out players like, some of these bad teams do with their DNPs and just make up fake injuries at the end of the year so they could sit out players. And potentially get in that 35 or so wins, next season. And that way they have a better chance at getting a Cooper Flag or a top 3 pick for that matter, based on the lottery. I mean, the Hawks last season were the 10th seed. They were 36-46, so 10 games below 500. Something I see the Miami Heat team could be, in a situation if we trade Jimmy Butler and we set out other players and just allow Khalil Ware and Kashaw Johnson and Jaime and Jovic and Bam and Tyler play together, and go with this youthful 1-year movement, then perhaps they can, lose 10 games, compared to the following year and be in that same position the Hawks were. They were a 10th seed play-in team, didn't make the playoffs. They were 36-46. And with the luck of the draw through the lottery, they got the number 1 overall pick as the 10th seed. I'm not saying that's going to happen based on the probability. It's unlikely, but the Heat could tank for one season, hypothetically get Cooper Flag, and you're automatically back in business the following year. You're back into the playoff race, and within a few years, you could be a top team in the East. Imagine a front court with Bam and Cooper Flag, and Tyler Hero in that mix as well with Jaime and Jovic. That could be incredible. So I I don't know how I feel about tanking. I don't know if I want to you know say that the Miami Heat are too prideful or just they're too stuck in their ways within their system and their philosophy of not tanking, but again, I've said this with Martell. Martell said this too in an episode that, sometimes you have to be bad again in order to be good because, again, we don't have any cap space. We don't have any assets. We don't have any draft capital. So it's hard for us to even trade for players when they say Miami only. When they only want to go to Miami, other teams don't perceive the assets that we have as valuable. And also, we just don't have the draft picks because we've traded them away right now. We only have one tradable draft pick in 2030. And so if another star gets disgruntled and says Miami as a destination, we might not be able to compete with other teams like in the most recent history, the Knicks, who gave up way too much for Mikal Bridges, but they had the assets to do that. Utah Jazz, you know, getting all of those assets from the Timberwolves, and then also from the Cavs. The Cavs had the assets to pounce on a Donovan Mitchell when he became available, and that wasn't even a team or a destination that he wanted to go to necessarily. So, yeah, I don't know if I agree fully with the Locked On guys. I mean, it's not a horrible take. I mean, it just really depends on Pat Riley, Mickey, and Spo if they're willing to sacrifice 1 year. And I mean, it's a big sacrifice giving up Jimmy Butler, honestly, because he's our best player, like I've mentioned. And so, but that can change the trajectory of this Miami Heat's franchise if we do a 1 year tank. I don't see the harm in that. Like I don't agree with teams that have tanked perpetually. Like we've seen the Sixers do that and they have not been successful. We've seen the Pistons do that and like the Wizards, and those are some horrible franchises. They're not the same as the Miami Heat. And you could tell why, because they aren't able to draft the right folks. They've missed out a lot on top five players compared to the Miami Heat, who have not missed out on players who are 15, 18, 25, or even second round players. So, yeah, so it's interesting. It's an interesting perspective from the Locked On NBA guys. I don't think it's a horrible idea, but you guys just let me know in the comments what you guys think. Do you think the Miami Heat should tank for one season so they can get into the Cooper Flag sweepstakes or even just get into the top 7 of the lottery? Like, we haven't had a top 10 pick since the Justice Winslow draft, and we got him at 10. Other than that, we've had the 13th, the 14th, the 15th, the 18th, the 25th, and then no picks, basically. So, yeah, let me know what you guys think about the prediction of the Miami Heat winning. What was that number again? We pull it up, 44 and a half games. And then also, what do you think about the Locked On Heat's suggestion of the Miami Heat tanking for 1 year, trading Jimmy Butler specifically to tank, and then put themselves in a position to get a lottery pick, a top 5 lottery pick? Let me know what you guys think. But thanks again for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.